Every Monday morning at this time for No Safe Spaces. Good morning.
Can you hear me this morning, Rich?
I can hear you just great, thanks. How are you?
Good. Well, let's get right to it, shall we? Back on September 28th, Colleen Irvine, the executive director at the New Hampshire, which is the UNH student newspaper, published an article called Fairweather, Free Speech. So it's a pretty exciting event, right? The UNH college newspaper is writing about free speech. She writes, "Without the First Amendment, I have no career. This part of the Constitution is what allows my staff and me to write about important and controversial topics and inform all of you about what is happening in the community and gives you all the right peacefully to agree or disagree. This also means, in America, if you can say what you want, other people have the same right to truthfully say what they want, and you really can't get mad about it." The article is a call to students of UNH for peaceful protest and respect free speech and the fundamentals of liberty, and I think overall that Colleen does a really good job. But, of course, she does leave some important points out. At some point, this speech, as we've seen on college campuses, the how much you hate that opposing view translates into an all-out attack to silence and destroy somebody. Now, Scott Yenor, who's a tenured political professor at Boise State University, recently posted an article in the Daily Signal titled, "The Transgender Activists Are Seeking to Undermine Parental Rights. Radical feminists aspire to revolutionize society," and he goes on to talk about how one of the ways they do that is to erase sexual taboos, embrace new ways to achieve sexual satisfaction outside of marriage. He adds that winning public sanction for same-sex marriage was the last great feminist victory. He talks about how undermining sex roles within marriage is a point that they're out to prove and to advance. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there was a little outrage, Rich?
Oh, I don't know. Probably not.
Well, we've documented some of the outrage. Over at intellectualtakeout.org, the response to Professor Yenor's article, students, activists, and even staff members at Boise State are now waging a relentless campaign to get Yenor fired or shut down. A petition to have him fired is going around campus. It's gained thousands of signatures. Activists have posted flyers attacking him. Some have called other faculty to come out and officially condemn him. So this isn't new to us, is it? We see this happening all the time. So what about that? You know, the university says that they're not going to fire him. That we have these professors, he's tenured, he writes things, you know, you don't always have to agree with him. So the professor says, you know, they're out to get me. You challenge left-wing orthodoxy, and they come out after you, and they do everything they can to silence you and your colleagues.
Hey, listen, you know, the tolerant left is only tolerant if you agree. And this is the problem with diversity in general, is diversity is not defined by differences in thought or attitude or approach. It's defined in differences of accent and skin color. That's it.
Right, and even that doesn't matter if you don't follow the ideology. If you don't bow down to the left-wing idea about how the world should be run, it doesn't matter what color or gender you are. To that point, last week, UC Santa Cruz, a meeting of college Republicans in a private room reserved at a library on campus, was interrupted by a small group of far-left students who barged in and started shouting at the people who were there. They were invited to stay and discuss their ideas, and they responded by saying, "Dialogue is violence."
Dialogue is violence.
So there is no discussion. So, like, you know, we talk about how the Democrats don't want to have a conversation about guns. They don't have a conversation about anything. The college Republicans observed that the protesters called us a number of different epithets, including fascists, racists, and white supremacists, and berated McHenry Library staff.
If dialogue was violence, then perhaps they meant to do violence to them by their dialogue.
Well, they just want them to shut up because anything they say is an act of violence. They called a library school employee who allowed them to use the room they're allowed to use a white supremacist because she refused to dissolve the meeting. Anyone that didn't explicitly join these leftists in their mission of screaming in the library became a white supremacist. So the activists who interrupted this meeting were eventually arrested and removed, but the point was that these students came to the conclusion that they not only have the right to label any opinion they oppose as violent, but they have an obligation to prevent discussion or association simply because those people don't agree with them.
Wow.
Isn't that heavy?
This is where we come to, huh?
That is right. Basically, you know, they don't want to hear it. They don't want anybody to have a conversation. And how can you talk about free speech? So here you are at UNH. You talk about a campus where there's free speech and there's a debate
But there isn't.
No, there isn't, and that's the problem. So I think Colleen needs to expand her investigative skills and go a little bit deeper because, if you want to talk about contradictory ideas and you want to talk about how they matter, you have to go attack the live diversity education. This culture teaches a curriculum that is so close-minded that this is where this intolerance comes from. So it creates the backlash at Boise State and UC Santa Cruz. I mean, in campuses all over the United States. How can you talk about defending free speech if you don't go out and, root and branch, go after the source of this sort of division and intolerance?
You can't. But the whole purpose of their tactics is to make it impossible. They're like ticks and gnats. They attach. They burr in. I mean, it gets to a point where, you have to remove chunks of skin in order to get that gnat or that tick that's burrowed in out. It becomes surgery, and it's painful, and it's bloody, and it's never good, but it has to be done, lest you be poisoned by the parasite.